So you're right, that kind of structure where I'm the only one. Ooh, you're really flirting with burnout.
Welcome to the Inspiro Podcast, a podcast exploring personal growth, leadership, strategy, communication, and fulfillment. We are your hosts, Jason Leftefeld and Bill Woodburn. I'm here as a dentist, transitioning into a career to help facilitate individuals and their organizations towards a more fulfilling future.
Hi there, I'm Bill Woodburn, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist in Austin, Texas. I'm fascinated by the way people come together to solve problems, whether that's couples or families, dental practices, or organizations. We're going to be exploring a lot of topics, and for us to be able to be free to do that, I have to let you know that this is not intended to be dental advice or counseling advice.
So I think that leads us to disappointment. Again, I have some personal experience with this, and I think part of this comes from the culture of dentists or practice owners have been taught to take responsibility. And so disappointment is partly a disappointment in myself because I couldn't elicit the change that I wanted. And so I was taught that if that doesn't happen, then it's my fault because I'm the owner, I'm the leader. And then disappointment in the team for not doing what I wanted or what we agreed upon.
Yes.
And so I think there's three things there. There's disappointment in myself, maybe taking too much responsibility, but realizing that I do have some. Two is disappointment in the team for two different branches. One is there are circumstances where things should be because I say so. And there's also times where there's shared decision making. And so then we have more accountability and responsibility that has to be discussed.
Not only that, that wider accountability and responsibility is usually what prevents us from burning out. Most of the folks that I go, practice owners who are burning out, will tell me it's like I'm the only one with the responsibility. So you're right, that kind of structure where I'm the only one, ooh, you're really flirting with burnout.
Mm-hmm.
The ones where it's like, well, in this appropriate place, I sent it to the team. The team all, made a decision. We all made a decision together about how this was going to change. Well, then it's everybody doing some heavy lifting, not just me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so good. So you're alluding there to where I was going next with the office that is a single owner, and that owner is feeling that pressure of being the owner. One solution is to elevate the team, to bring the team up and distribute responsibility, delegate some things. And that takes some challenging conversation and experimentation. Like they have to be allowed to fail, to learn, to be elevated. So I think getting your feedback on that version, but then there's also, that might be one of the benefits of joining a group practice of some sort, whether that's with a partnership where it's just a couple people that own an office, or even a DSO where you are an employee in an office, but you have 10 other offices and doctors and a support team that are helping to manage that with appropriate communication can be an awesome tool for alleviating some of that stress of being the only one.
Actually, I think that's the secret why one of the reasons many dentists are going corporate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of it is the financial structure and whatever, but I think a big part of it is I don't want to have to make all these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least I don't want that sense of guilt and responsibility. You're bright guys. You can make those decisions. So it's not a capability problem. It's just day after day making these ownership decisions is just wearing me down.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you go through a phase where it's not working.
Especially, yes. The other thing, and I'll say this, I'm going to include myself on this. Most professionals are professionals, but because we've gone through some training and it required a level of commitment to that training to get where we are. Okay, just a fact. But one of the things that we start to use to get through that is we set goals, we set our expectations around those goals, and then we modify our behavior to achieve those goals. Sounds great. And I think if we're talking about one person going through dental school or one person going through counseling school, that works great. But when you're trying to apply that whole thing to a team of people, now you have to be careful about those expectations, those goals. It's not as clean. It's not as easy. It's not as straightforward. It's like, well, what are our goals? What are our expectations? And how much will these people dedicate? Being a dentist, you know that you can dedicate, large portions of your life to becoming a dentist and becoming an excellent dentist. Because that's what it takes. That's what it took. You did it. Not everybody in your office may be willing to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a bad way to do it. It just may not work among a differentiated group of 10 people who are coming to work for you.
Yeah. Can you talk about how to manage disappointment?
Ooh.
Disappointment in ourselves or our team.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll take a stab at it as well, but I'd love to hear your professional opinion.
I think the thing that I see most, both consulting and then also just in my counseling practice, is how much disappointment there is that is behind a lot of people feeling bad or making behavioral mistakes with a team or whatever. I mean, disappointment is big. But one of the biggest first challenges is to be aware of our own disappointment because it can look like other things. Why am I so angry at this patient? We've been working on this long-term project of sort of dental rehabilitation. I'm just getting frustrated, angry. What's going on? It's like, well, a good question is, am I disappointed? Was I expecting more from me? Was I expecting more from them? Was I expecting more from the biology or the materials? I mean, maybe I'm disappointed that I had something else in mind. But the way it comes to me is I'm angry at this person. Or every time the assistant does that, it just really grates on my nerves. Well, wait a minute. Could that be about disappointment? Am I expecting something different or something bigger or something better? If it's that, and frequently it is, disappointment, then I have to say, what is keeping me from voicing my disappointment in a clearer and more positive way? I mean, right now, I'm just angry at the assistant at the chair side. She did that thing again. I just hate it when she does that thing. Well, okay, I get it. You're disappointed, and I appreciate that. Yeah, but that just doing that's not really going to help her change it. And so it's like, oh, maybe my anger, irritation, wanting to distance myself from this patient or this team member is really about disappointment. And is there a way for me to start to communicate that in a way that's actually going to get some action around it rather than me just feeling bad?
Mm-hmm. You took my answer there in your answer, but I had one word, and that was clarity.
Clarity. That's
And
it.
you explained it in much more depth than I would have, but and you added to it. I was going to say being clear about what it is we want and being able to express that to those that are involved is critical. And I think you added on a layer there of self-awareness piece that I wasn't including that is critical to the whole equation. So that's great. I think taking that step back and doing that exercise for yourself will help to clean up your disappointment.
the other piece about that really helps with disappointment, and I'm occasionally guilty of getting dental practice owners disappointed because we'll have some
Hold on a
strategic
second. Hold
planning.
on. You're creating disappointment,
Oh
Bill?
yes, and I'm sadly I do sometimes because we have this strategic planning meeting, and there are these lovely aspirations that we talk about sometimes for days, so that people can imagine a better practice for themselves. That's actually a good thing. But one of the things about the human mind is we're not always good at differentiating aspirational from practical. It's like, yeah, we've been imagining for 2 days at this retreat center, your perfect practice. Well, yeah, but Monday you're going to go back to the practice you actually have. Okay. And there's gonna be a little disappointment. It's like, ooh, now I know more about what I want. As I know more about what I really want, I can see more and more stuff I don't like here. And so it's like, okay, so how good are you at being able to turn disappointment into a more creative force rather than destructive force?
So I have two things along those lines. So I agree with you. We run into that a lot with encouraging people to think big when thinking about their visions of the future for themselves, their offices, et cetera, the families. We don't do a good enough job of then working backwards from there to today to say, all right, what can I do tomorrow to get me one step closer to that aspirational vision? I think there is a gap there in our our time, our messaging, something, and that's partly what creates the frustration, I
Mm-hmm.
think, or disappointment, etc.
Sure.
And the other place I see it is this is kind of a big tangent, but maybe related. When we do core values exercises, I see people come up with aspirational core values more than existing core values. We have a real desire to think greatly of ourselves when we are giving ourselves core values. And that ends up being oftentimes aspirational. I always encourage people to do the exercise for themselves, but then do the exercise with a loved one or a coworker or a friend so you can get some honest feedback on what's real and what's aspirational. And then I encourage people, you know what? If you have a couple of core values that are aspirational for you, great. Work on those things. What does it take? What does it look like to live that core value? And then make a plan for it. And you're going to be disappointed along the way, but just know that's a work in progress.
Mm-hmm. If you're trapped in perfectionism, planning is an awful experience
Mm,
because now you know the gap between what you want and what you have. And there are people that just bothers. That literally they come to, I cannot sleep. I cannot think about anything else. I can barely eat. I keep thinking about that gap. So the part of change here and part of avoiding burnout is being able to have a healthy dose of self-forgiveness, of that sense that, this is an aspirational idea that I'm going to enact that value or have these goals or do these changes. And, the memo that you need to get is it's not going to be perfect.
yeah.
It's going to be a bit messy.
Yeah.
And when you end up at the end, it's not going to be exactly that thing. It's going to be close. It's closer than if you don't plan at all, but it's not going to be exactly that thing, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And going in knowing that, it's not going to be perfect. That there's going to come a moment where the last 10% of perfection is going to cost you 50% more effort. It's like,
Mm.
really want to do this? That's also, by the way, something that really frustrates teams a lot. When they've got it up to really pretty good, and the owner comes in and says, we're going to dig deep and get that last 10%. But it's going to cost us more effort than we used to get, the first 90.
Mm.
And the team's like, oh God, really? That just doesn't that payoff just doesn't sound very good.
Mm.
It's got to make sense in a practical way.
What kind of check-in do you suggest for people when they are in that place of having these aspirational goals? They're feeling themselves as disappointed.
Mhm.
And I get a sense sometimes that we don't check in often enough. And
Oh yeah.
so if you're going monthly, sometimes a month is too long and you realize, wow, we did things great for a week and then 3 weeks of back to the same old. And so now trying to go back to that thing we were wanting to do is too far away. It's too big of a jump. So what do you use? How do you determine frequency of check-ins with yourself or your team?
So the first question that I would suggest you ask if you're making a change, is what is the smallest change that's still a change? Let's not talk about the biggest change. What is the smallest change that is a recognizable and beneficial change? And it could be pretty small. It could be in uh, the whoever's doing scheduling is just a bit smoother in their presentation of the services we're talking about or getting something scheduled. And but deciding for yourself not what the highest bar is, but what is the lowest bar that's still a change. Your
Mm-hmm.
team will so appreciate that because this is oh good, I can now compliment them on a change because I'm not waiting to the end point of perfection. I've got my minimum change required here, and then you can bump that up a little and bump that up a little. um, the other is, am I willing to recognize people who are making the change as they're making it and not use this as some sort of reward at the end? If it's not perfect, I'm never going to say anything about it because we're getting to that old joke about the farmer who loved his wife so much he almost told her. You know, uh, I'd say that's a joke, but there are people that actually do that both in their marriages and in their practices. You know, what once I've built this up, to the highest extent, then I'll finally tell them. It's like that's not the way it goes. Um, I was talking to a teenager one time who was really pleased with his dad. His dad had made a lot of changes. They were really working together, and I just asked the teen, what's the big difference? What's the thing that makes this work? And he said something like, I don't quite have the words, something like that. I know my dad is watching me, but I know that not only does he see what I do wrong, but he sees everything I do right. He never misses a thing I do right. So it's a lot easier when he weighs in on something I just did wrong.
Hmm.
Again, it's that, okay, I've got a change I'm nursing here in this team. And I'm going to be looking for the smallest change that's still a change. And I'm going to be ready to call it out as a good thing over and over and over. And the team goes, he watches for the change. And he's happy with us nurturing and growing this change. Sure, that gets people going on things. The last question is, how long am I willing to take on this change? A lot of people, want the change by Thursday.
Yeah.
And there are not a lot of changes, particularly the more structural it is, the more systemic it is. You're not going to get it by Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably going to have to make a lot of other changes before that changes. To prevent disappointment, how about getting realistic about, I'm going to change this over a month. I'm going to change this over 6 months. I'm going to change this over a year. Now I'm going to be nurturing the change the whole time. But what's realistic for this so that I don't get disappointed in 2 weeks if this thing embedded in the structure of my practice is not changed? Plus, a little proviso with that is I'm not going to wait to start a change until I just cannot stand it anymore. Most changes take time, and you don't want to be screaming at the end of it. So if there's a change that needs to happen, maybe you should institute it pretty soon. Again, that's to prevent burnout, that sort of ultimate frustration of this is just not working.
So you touched there on the value of recognition. And this has come up for decades. Kouzes and Posner, in their top 5 leadership things, one of them is encourage the heart. And in a couple of years ago, I took a Harvard business class, and recognition was in the top 2. And it varies based on industry, people, et cetera, but it's up there. And I'll be honest, I feel like I've really maybe exemplified all the things to do wrong. I am what I am. This is another one that for a number of years, I didn't give recognition because I couldn't find something to recognize. I was looking for the exceptional rather than thanking for the usual. And that was a huge mistake in team building, in interactions, communication, all of the above. Just that, as you talked about, finding things to recognize is of such a huge value and importance to your relationship, to your work environment, your home environment, all the above, that it can't be overstated. The need, the value to recognize, give thanks.
Occasionally, I'll hear this really paradoxical remark from practice owners, which is, I really, really want team players, but I get frustrated having to give, so much recognition.
Right.
And it's like, wait a minute, team players thrive on recognition. Now, if you want a bunch of solo artists, they don't care what you think, all right? But they're not team players. So it's like, the kind of person you want, you need to make an environment for them. And for most dental practices are heavily team players, and the recognition does 2 things. One, it's what they're looking for. It's usually a major goal. But the other thing is it settles the team down. Every team that I have talked to wants to be a good team, and they want to be a good team for their dentist. There's a huge amount of loyalty there. And the biggest anxiety on a team, particularly an anxiety that sort of affects everything, kind of a broad brush anxiety, is we don't know if we're pleasing our dentist or not.
Right.
And so we're all sitting around worrying about it all the time. And the practice leader's saying, I don't know, they're just not, they don't seem to be on the ball. I wonder what they're thinking about. Well, they're thinking about pleasing you, but they can't figure out how to do it, or if they've done it, and what I'll see teams do is they'll try something that I know it's what the dentist wants, but the dentist doesn't comment on it. And so the team gets confused. So they ditch that. They try something else.
Yeah.
And they keep ditching and trying and ditching and trying in this sort of trial and error. And now chaos is starting to descend.
Yeah. Yeah. And that circles back to the idea of clarity of expectations. What does this look like in this new idea? What does this change look like in action? And if we aren't saying it, then everybody has their own guess, and they're having their own attempt. And like you just said, if that attempt doesn't get recognized, they try something else. So to the person observing that, it looks like they don't know what they're doing. Why do you keep doing different things?
Yeah.
It's like, well, you
Why
haven't.
Is it chaos every day.
Yeah. That's good. So you mentioned there as well the pressure to change. And I think this is another important concept, that it's rare for us to change on purpose. It's more common that we change in response to an insult or pressure or a traumatic event. Something forces us to change. That's more common than us saying, you know what, I want this to be different and I'm going to make it happen.
I tell my interns that it's really nice to have a client come in who has all these ideas about how he'd like his life to be better. But what I like to hear is when they walk in my office and their butt hits the chair and they say, I am so sick and tired of this. That guy's ready to change. The other guy, we just may be talking about it for a couple months, but that guy's ready to change.
Right.
But pressure has to be carefully modulated. It's very easy to overwhelm a team. Remember, your team wants to please you. You could just add fuel to the fire by having this sort of grim visage of you're not pleasing me might increase that chaos we've been talking about. As part of leadership is also encouraging, which is we can do this. Yes, there's pressure, but that it's natural and logical pressure. It's not pressure from me, the owner. Yeah, you may have those times when you need to, but those should be few and far between. What you want is where you have a big meeting and you say, it really didn't work out with that patient and they got pretty mad. I know you guys don't want to have another angry patient. What do we need to change? Mm-hmm. Well, see, that's just a logical and natural piece from we don't want another angry patient. Mm-hmm. Or we don't want to, misbill something, or we don't want, okay, good deal. That's different than me applying pressure.
And that's what I was referring to. I think it's unintentional pressure that's created that elicits changes, and the changes that are made from that aren't always the direction that we want them to go. Mm-hmm. They're just fuel for change of some sort. And so I think linking those things together, realizing that you are being pressured and you don't like it, allows you to step back and make a conscious decision about what direction you want to go. Otherwise, the pressure is going to continue to build. You're going to make some sort of change.
Yes, you're exactly right.
Something's going to happen, and you're going to go down a different path, and likely pressure is going to mount again. And that's the cycle of burnout, which we could move to next, in my opinion, that pressure builds and builds. We don't make a conscious effort. We don't really look at ourselves, evaluate, check in that self-awareness, self-management piece. And
one of the pieces of the products of too much pressure, or the wrong kind, is that we make our decisions in order to relieve the pressure, not what's going to be best for the practice.
Yeah, great clarification. Thank you.
That's when it's getting to you. It's like, yeah. I just want it to stop.
Right.
When I start taking the bills and putting them in the trash, I know, okay, my finances are just way too pressurized right now.
Yes. Or you're overwhelmed. So you talk about this a lot, this test. When you pull up to the office in the morning, do you have a sick feeling in your stomach or an exciting feeling in your stomach before you walk in the door? So I know there are people out there that the pressure builds and builds and builds until finally one day they walk in the office, they see the first patient, they say, nope, cancel the rest of my day, I'm done.
Yes.
That is a response. That is a change. That is response to pressure. Mm-hmm. That might not be the best. That might not be the healthiest. Maybe the healthiest for that day, for that person's sake. But as that cycle repeats, that is a sign of changes are not being done to elicit a positive outcome. They're just a release valve.
Yes. My favorite story about that is I had a client who, he wasn't a dentist. He had a company in town. And one day he was driving to work and he was so burned out and felt so bad about going to work. He just passed the offices and he kept driving and he just kept going. And he said he felt better and better. And that evening he called his wife from El Paso, which is about 350 miles away from here. It's like he said it felt so good. He didn't want to turn around. I thought, well, eventually you're going to reach an ocean out there, and you guys are going to have to stop. But that's where it becomes just about relieving the pressure.
Yeah,
and we don't want to let ourselves get to that point.
Yeah, he pulled a Forrest Gump.
Yes, absolutely.
That's episode 42 in the books. I think it's one of our best, if I don't say so myself. A lot of valuable content there. I hope, if needed, you'll go back and listen again. I think Bill gave some great advice, a number of different concepts to keep in mind, even activities to do, things to talk about with yourself, loved one, and your team. So use this episode. Use it to do better, work with your team better. Stay tuned for the next one. Talk at you there.